as if I was calling it. Because on JSBin, I don't, I don't really bring in a file the way I would in a project. But here you see there's my call JQuery, and then I load JQuery, and then I load my plugin, my JQuery plugin. So then, let me go grab a simpler one. This one has stuff on there. I don't have a simpler one. Simple one. Oh, let's just erase it. Okay. So, JQuery, my plugin, and then here's how I called my plugin. And whenever you go and download a JQuery plugin, any of them worth their salt should have at least a minimal API for you to see what options you can pass, see how to call it, see what you can do with it. So this one I just called blocks. So we're gonna select. I'm going to select my container element, which you can see up here is just my section container. And then when I select my container element, all I have to do is call my plugin, fire it off of that selector, and it builds everything that we just already had. It's just a lot simpler to wrap it up in the plugin, because instead of having all that code sitting in the page, this is all I have now. It's just that sitting in my document right now. So the actual code, the actual JavaScript that we're calling is out here, and this is actually and this is the plugin. That when you look at it, it has. We go find. I just put everything pretty much in an initialize function. Again, you can look at this on JSBin. It's not the best written plugin, but it follows some basic good ideas, good practices. A couple of them. So all we do is create all these objects, and you'll see that I created all my form, my labels, and my inputs in here, and then I append them all to an inputs to the form. And then here I create a bunch of divs, red, blue, and green. And then I have my other kind of stuff that does here's our events, show red on change, visibility, visible, hidden. That's all the same stuff that I had before. I just dropped all that code, I just dropped it into a plugin. So, and that's something that I think plugins is that going to be in the next one, Brad, or future? So, just kind of show you how it looks from that perspective, and then we fire it, and then it works over here. So, plugins are fun and easy. I'll show you the last thing that I was going to show tonight is using options with plugins, because I want to see what happens on JSBin. That's my problem. I just realized that JSBin just keeps ordering these based on when I viewed them, and so that's why I can't ever find the file. So, and I haven't memorized these names, so I'm kind of just going to poke through these and see if I can get the right one. Nope, wrong one.
Over here.
I got all ready to try to do this presentation with JSBin. I thought it was really cool. And then I talked to Brad, and he was like, I just meant JSBin should be the place where people can go see the code. You don't have to do your presentation with it. I was like, but by then I was pretty committed to trying this. So. Looking at the one I just changed, it saved it. So here we have the same plugin. To show you the last thing, I'm just passing some options. Most plugins take options in the form of an object literal with just some values. So like this one, the way I set this one up is however many red blocks you want, just write the count. However many blue you want, write the count. Green, write the count. So, and again, you can see the curly braces right there, and, just some key values with commas right there. So, the output of that is I get 5 reds, 4 blues, and 1 green. We can change that in here, and get 3 green. So, and these lists get pretty long. A lot of really good plugins out there have just a ton of options, and but it's all generally the same format. So if you just can, if you know how to work with the format, if you know how to just kind of, look at the API for the simple stuff, just see like, if I'm going to fire the function on a JQuery object, and then I'm going to pass some options in there, whatever they say I can, and then you can, fiddle with it and get it to work. So that's kind of the low-down basic thing on how to use some plugins out there. So that's the end of what I have. If anybody has any questions or wants to look at anything, be glad to keep, look at stuff further. So. Okay. Anybody, I don't know how many people in here actually are really new to JQuery. Are there several people that are trying to learn how to use JQuery and haven't used it that much? What do you guys think? Do you I mean,
makes sense.
Did that answer some questions at least? Like, I just want you guys to be able to be more confident, like to just go, get a copy of JQuery and start trying some of this out. The console is a great place to learn. Just logging out your selectors, making sure you're getting a handle on them. Yes, sir.
Is JQuery browser neutral?
It is. I think the way they say it is most browsers or something. They don't want to take credit for any browser out there, but yeah, generally it's browser neutral. jQuery
works on iPhone, works on Android.
Yeah, works on mobile devices are great for JavaScript in general. They all seem to they do great for JavaScript. But even the stuff you end up having the more trouble with obviously is desktop IE versions, and jQuery can make that a lot easier to deal with older IE versions, and because you do get your selectors, and jQuery does the hard work in the back to make sure things work correctly.
Yeah. That is changing in 2.0.
I think it's important to
they're dropping support for 8 and lower. So
are they really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm probably going to still be using 1.9 for a while.
Yeah, a lot of people will. But that's something to be
that's one
aware
of the main reasons I use jQuery is to get some stuff out of IE 8 that I need. So,
it's really important to know that jQuery is not different than JavaScript. jQuery is JavaScript. So to say does this browser support jQuery is like the same question as does this browser have JavaScript? So.
Yeah, but that's the point though. Is not every browser has the same JavaScript.
But
not everything is available.
My point is that jQuery is JavaScript, and what they do in jQuery is they try to normalize the browser problem. So if one browser has a certain way of running a certain method, and another browser has a different way of running that method, instead of you having to do an if statement deciding in native JavaScript which way you're going to run that method, you just do the jQuery version of it, and they take care of that for you. So the real question is, kind of what they were just talking about. If I use JQuery, does JQuery know how to handle all the browsers I want it to handle in the context of this method I'm trying to do? And the answer is almost always yes. But there are certain cases when Internet Explorer 7, for instance, I know I had a problem where JQuery doesn't handle Internet Explorer correctly, but they try to handle all the different ways of doing it. That's one of the big. If JQuery can be summed up in 2 sentences, one of the sentences is browser compatibility. That's what they're known for doing.
Like Ajax. Back
Yeah,
in the
like
early days of Ajax, it was such a pain, the different browsers to handle.
I was looking at jQuery, like the internals, and the section where they handle Ajax, it's like 2 printed pages long. And when you do jQuery's Ajax, it's like 3 lines of code. So they just normalized, all those problems for you in an instant. And the other thing that jQuery does and what it's known for is DOM manipulation. If you guys want a fun pull your hair out kind of project, try making div tags, putting them into the DOM on screen, and changing things about them. Try doing that with native JavaScript, without jQuery or without YUI or any other tools that are like jQuery. Just try doing it and see how insanely difficult it is. The first time I ever tried doing something like that, right before I started working with you, I spent 2 days working on something that later on in jQuery took me 2 hours.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So I don't know how true this is, but is jQuery more searchable by the search engines? Because I know JavaScript, like Google won't read it, right?
Well, again,
But like with
jQuery is
jQuery,
JavaScript, so it's the same.
So it's the same. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much for search engines, anytime you're, updating the DOM dynamically, search engines aren't going they're going to see what's on the static page.
For my presentation, which is next time, does everyone understand what DOM is? What's the difference between DOM and HTML? No? What's a selector? Exactly. Let's go over those 2 things, because those are like absolute beginner jQuery things.
Go over them right now. What do you want to go over?
Well, I want the people who are in the room to know about it. Like, Joe, let's hear DOM.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
DOM.
It's crazy. Just making up words.
Well, HTML is an instructional language. Okay, it's just a
Building
text.
blocks.
It's just a text file.
Yeah.
Just a series of tags.
Yeah, it's like it's like when we write code like if statements and loops. We have a human version of what we're writing, but the in-memory version is different when it comes to compile time. When you break things down into zeros and ones. Well, HTML is like your instruction manual of how you want things to look, but the browser takes that initial instruction manual, builds it into what's called DOM, which is the memory version of your HTML, and then completely forgets about what HTML is, or at least what the initial tags were. It thinks of things in terms of rectangles and painting them on the screen and where they are, and that is DOM. It stands for Document Object Model. And when you right-click and view source, you're looking at what was the original HTML. That's what Google gets to see. When you add new things to the screen using jQuery or JavaScript or whatever, you're manipulating the DOM, and that's different. And so when you use a tool like this developer tool right here, and you're examining the things on the screen, you could be examining elements on the screen that when you right-click and view source aren't even there. That's because there's a big difference between DOM and the original HTML. That's important to understand. So when you're making websites, if you're making a one-page website where the initial source HTML is just kind of like a frame, and then you're using JavaScript to go and get all the little bits and pieces using Ajax, go to the server and bring stuff, bring your web page back in like Facebook, and then you notice when you click on Facebook, the page doesn't refresh. They don't go to the server to get brand new HTML and have the browser render it as new DOM. They just say, oh, you want this page, you want to be looking at your messages now? Let's just go to the server, bring back some new little fragments of HTML and plug them into the DOM where we need them to. And when you do that kind of strategy, you have conflicts with an SEO strategy, which can sometimes be overcome. I'm not just making things up.
That's a very good explanation. I just wanted to put you back on the spot.
Well, now it's your turn. Explain the difference between CSS selectors and jQuery selectors, and what a selector is.
Verbiage. A selector is just a way to reference an object in the DOM. So before, when it's Marco, right?
Marcos.
Before, when Marcos was talking about selecting div elements and selecting elements by their ID and their class, that's manipulating or actually referencing the live state of the page, the DOM, as Brad just explained. CSS selectors versus jQuery selectors, I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay, well, a CSS selector, do you want to show a CSS selector real quick? I mean, everyone knows what CSS is, but the selector is the part that goes before the first parentheses, or rather the first curly. So where it says .myClass, right? Yeah, right about there where it says .myClass.
Well, these are all technically, aren't they?
Well, they're all selectors. I'm just picking one.
Okay.
So a selector can also be, you can have several things. You don't just, I guess beginners usually think of selectors as you're either going to select an ID or you're going to select a class, but you can select all the classes that are within an ID, and that's all one selector, right? So show them how you would select all the my classes of an ID of something.
So like this with, or you want it?
Sure. We'll do a space.
Yeah, from the space.
Oh, you want it from? I think.
Yeah,
So-
all my classes in one.
Right.
Okay, got it. Let's go up here. I'm just trying to get a blank space to work. Get my cursor on a
I
blank
know.
space.
This is why I don't like editing inside of these tools. They are hard to manipulate. I just want you to type it out. We don't have to see it work.
Can you just describe it? I think it's 5 letters.
I'll get rid of one of these.
Hey, a picture says 1,000 words.
So
I'm trying to
we
paint a
just
picture.
said, yeah.
Okay, so with that selector, he's looking for any div tags that then have child DOM elements of my class, right? And if he closes that gap, div.myClass, that's saying he's looking for any div tags that are also a class of my class. Okay, so there's all kinds of different ways to do CSS selectors. Something that I've come to learn recently, and I've been doing CSS selectors since dinosaurs invented them, is that I didn't know that CSS selectors read from right to left.
Yeah.
And what that means...
Yeah, they find most specific to the broadest.
What that means is if you have... Well, I wanted to do an ID. So let's change the div to an ID. Just call it 1 or something. And then get rid of the div and do a space. So what some people think is that this looks for all elements that are an ID of 1, and then finds that, like, moving from left to right, and then finds children that are .myClass, like almost like this is like super efficient. Like, there should only be one thing with an ID of 1 because that's how IDs work, right? And that's not true. It actually looks for every single element on the screen that has a class name of my class, and then filters out which ones are children of a £sign of 1, an ID of 1. So it moves from right to left. And granted, that's a little bit, it seems like a slower way of doing it, The browser selector engine is extremely fast. It's much faster than even Sizzle is, and Sizzle's known for being very fast. You know, Sizzle's the one that JQuery has. But if that was a jQuery selector, jQuery, or Sizzle rather, is smart enough to look at that and break it up into pieces and would look for the # of 1, and it would do a document.getElement by ID, which is extremely fast, and then would look for sub things that are of my class. So in a way, it optimizes it, and so that's how CSS selectors are different than jQuery selectors.
I didn't know that they actually do optimizations like that in Sizzle.
I read it from Paul Irish when he was dissecting the internals of jQuery. Remember the YouTube videos I gave you guys a few weeks ago? One of them was a Paul Irish video. He was talking about that. It was really interesting.
I also recently learned that it renders backwards.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's crazy, right? It seems counterintuitive. Those are the two things I wanted to brush on.
Yeah, from a jQuery standpoint, we had a really complex web application that was getting really bogged down and really slow. And one of the big things we did to optimize it was make sure we always started from an ID in our jQuery selectors and then reference items after that ID. And that sped up things a lot, and so that makes a lot of sense.
But it'll speed things up in jQuery. It will not speed things up in CSS.
Right.
There's been all kinds of benchmarks of putting the ID, having an ID first, like what we have here for 1. It doesn't make things. It makes things like 2 1,000ths of a second faster or something like that. And that's for selecting like 10,000 things, 2 1,000. So if you're talking about in realistic selecting 12 things, we're talking about like in the millionths of a second faster. Another thing about CSS selectors is they always work from a parent down to child fashion. They do not at all work from a child up fashion. Does that make sense? So we know that by that selector, the 1 must be a parent of .myClass. Okay, if you start there, the far left is always a parent, and then as you move to the right, it gets like down smaller and smaller. With jQuery, with its special selectors, because they have Sizzle, they got to write their own rules. They have the ability to go in both directions, not within the same selector, but by using like .parents and you know, those sort of things. Which yeah, exactly. .find, which gives you a lot of really cool capabilities. Which that's what I'm going to probably show you.
Is Sizzle another plugin?
Sizzle is a chunk of code that exists in jQuery already.
Oh, it's already
jQuery doesn't operate without Sizzle. It's like the wheels.
Oh.
Yeah.
If all you want is CSS selection to just make it easier to pick objects in the DOM, you can just use Sizzle. You don't need to use jQuery.
Or if you wanted to write the next there's jQuery, there's YUI, there's Dojo, there's all these things that are kind of alternatives of jQuery. If you wanted to write the next big time thing and compete with jQuery, you could say, well, you know, I use Sizzle as well, and so my selectors will be just as fast as jQuery, and here's where you can download Sizzle if you just wanted to download it all by itself.
That's good. I was thinking about writing another.
Yeah, I thought I'm just saying, I just explained that way to explain that they're separate parts. I'm just saying that they are separate things, but jQuery comes with the bells. Yeah.
I think at this point, almost all of the big JavaScript libraries use Sizzle.
They probably do. It's one of those projects that Google and Facebook get involved with and make it better, faster. You know, when you write a really cool open source thing, eventually Google and Facebook will get involved and make it better. That's just what they do. Memcache, APC.
Kind of same department, but yeah.
Not really.
Sort of. Whatever. Outside of the scope of this conversation.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, I mean, we're here. The meeting's over. You guys can take off, or we can